Welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon.
And I'm Stuart.
We're both property people running our own businesses. This podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. So, do you want to start us off, Stuart? Because you went to an auction recently.
Yeah, so I went to an auction last Thursday down in the southwest. I had my eye on two potential properties.
There was a convent and
That's right.
The other one.
Convent stroke former brothel. And the other one was a Victorian property that was split into three flats. But to be honest, when I arrived at the auction, I was I was already aware that I probably wouldn't be getting what I wanted purely because of the amount of people in the room.
Oh, wow. How many? Do you sort of, as an idea?
Oh, I would put it in the region of 50 to 70, I think, maybe.
How many lots were there in the auction?
About 14-ish. So it was a small auction, quite succinct. But because all of the properties were local, I knew that there would be quite a bit of competition on certain properties. So, as always, I'd kind of done my numbers beforehand and worked out the sort of range that I would bid and wouldn't bid. And
had you done any surveys or legal checks?
On these ones, no, actually. I had done on the previous auction property where I did go through all of the legal process before I even went to the auction. On these ones, because of the value of them, I mean, it's still a lot of money, but I was more confident that should I win it, that anything that came out, if I won it at the prices we wanted, I knew that things that came out of it.
You had enough contingency in there.
Yeah. So, not for say subsistence, but then, I walked around both properties with my builder. So again, that gives me an element of confidence. We had good looks at the roof and walked around. So structurally, I was more confident. Obviously, you never know with legals, and clearly we'd never advise anyone to go to an auction.
No, it's definitely good to be prepared and check these things in advance where you can.
Yeah, absolutely. But so the first auction I went to was for properties in the southwest, but the auction was in London, and I think that worked in my favour because the competition was lower, whereas the competition was higher. So, but it was really interesting nonetheless because I think it's probably only the third auction I've been to, but you start to pick up on language of the auctioneer. And also how people interact at auction. So I saw it as another really good day of learning for me. But yeah, that's the biggest event this week for me. How about you?
Well, before we get to that, what happened?
I didn't know.
You can't say you went to an auction and you were looking for two properties.
I thought I said I didn't get. Yeah, so both of them went above. One of them went close to what my bottom price was, but I would usually come in towards the end of the bid anyway. And I knew that if I came in at the stage I was going to come in, the price would have just gone up to past what my thresholds were. So long story short is that I didn't bid on either of them because they both went, and the second one went for 10k plus above above the top guide price in the auction, which I wouldn't have been prepared to pay either. So no wins this day, but like I say, for me, it was still a good experience and learnt a lot about how auctioneers communicate during the auction, which is interesting.
Yeah. By communicate, what do you mean? You mean to the audience, or?
Yeah, so just little things. I think if you haven't been to auctions before, you might.
Yeah, which I haven't yet. It's
you might not pick up on them, but if you've been before, you start to. And some of it's just really straightforward language. So, if let's say bidding started at 150, and he says, right, we're going down to 150, but it won't sell at that price. He's telling you reserves not met. So, you can bid at 150, but you can be sure it won't be sold at that stage.
Yeah, it's going to have to go higher. Yeah.
So you have to go higher. Equally, sometimes, if the bidding's good, let's say the guide price is 150 or 200 and you're on 145, if he says, okay, so I'm taking bids at 145 and it will sell in the room today, then you know that you're now bidding on a live property, and it's little nuances like this that you don't necessarily pick up on at first that are there, which are really good. Also, the auctioneer is quite within his rights just to take imaginary bids, and they do that.
Isn't that only allowed up to the point where it reaches reserve or something? I think I've heard that before. Yeah.
Exactly that, So sometimes, if you sit there and you scratch your chin with a pen like I did, and he sort of looks at you and goes, and I'll take 5 there. And I'm sort of looking around going, well, not me. But he's just taking bids in the room to try and get up to that reserve price.
Yeah.
So, but I'd advise anyone interested in property, get along and just go to one I made sure I went to one before I went to my first one where I wanted to be, just to make sure I was comfortable with the setup.
Yeah, it's definitely something I want to try, just to see how well it works. And
you should. I'll let you know the next time I go to one in London.
Yeah, that'd be quite good. I imagine the ones in London are pretty big in terms of attendance and things.
Yeah, varied. It depends on the auctioneer. So you might have Allsops, they're really, really big. So they'll have big ones in, say, Mayfair and whatever. Then you might have smaller agents. But again, you can be quite big, but some of them aren't as big as you might expect. The one I did for one in, I think it was in Kensington, was quite small, so it wasn't that big. Oh. So there you go. So
right, cool. Right, I'll go back to your question now. So what I've been doing recently is working on adding some finance to a couple of my properties. So one of them is on a very good base rate tracker mortgage. So I don't want to touch that one. And the other one I've just remortgaged onto a relatively low fixed rate for 5 years now. But I'm now, for both of those, looking at extending the borrowing, getting further money from the same lenders. So I've been juggling figures to try and work out how much I could get and how much would be sensible to get and how much I could afford to get, and then what I could do with those funds that could be extracted, and whether it's actually possible to extract enough to make them useful, which is always challenging because the further borrowing rates are a lot higher than the sort of main borrowing.
What sort of rates are you looking at?
So the further borrowing rate I'm looking at on both of them actually is 3.74, I think, and the tracker is 1.25 above base, so that's currently 2. And the fix I've just gone for was 2.6 or 2.7, I think.
That's good.
So the further borrowing is a lot more expensive than the current ones. And there's a reasonable amount of equity in both properties. But it's tens of thousands in total. But will that then be enough to provide a deposit for another property? Is the puzzle I'm trying to work out at the moment. And I want to invest locally to me here at the moment, so that I can self-manage the properties more easily. And this is not a cheap area.
No.
So I think the minimum I need to have available to put into a new purchase in this area is probably in the sort of 90,000 range. Again, I'm slightly restricting myself because I have a strong preference towards freehold rather than leasehold. But I think I'd probably be looking at a 2-bed place, probably slightly south of here, so probably in Hawley. That's what I'm currently thinking. So they're just a little bit cheaper. And if I could manage to get 90,000 out of the equity in these 2 properties, then I think I could probably just about manage to get a 2-bed in Hawley. But it's going to be extremely close, and I'm not quite sure the valuations on these 2 properties is going to support raising that much.
Is that are you basing that on the potential future purchase on a sort of 75% loan to value? Yeah,
I'm trying to avoid going higher than 75 at the moment.
Yeah.
there are obviously mortgages that will take you up to 85, but that's,
Rarely on
I'm
a single let.
bit risk averse. No, you can. You can definitely get 85 ones on single lets. And there may not be many.
Yeah, I was going to say they must be relatively new because typically it's usually one savings bank, who's Kent Reliance, and who else are there? I think Interbay. But usually,
you know exactly who more than me.
Yeah,
I couldn't name any of the brands.
But that's interesting because usually on a standard villian, I know sort of like Paragon go up to 80, but it's very rare for a single let. So if you know a couple,
I wonder if I'm thinking of 80 rather than 85. I might be, but
but either way.
But yeah, so anyway, I'm definitely restricting myself to 75. That's a deliberate choice, and I'm not going higher than that on the two that I'm refinancing either. I don't want to. Although in actual fact, I think both of those are more likely to be restricted by the rental cover requirements.
So we're doing that on the 1.55 or 155% or 145%.
Crikey, now I've got to try and remember the calculation or the criteria I've been looking at for these further borrowings. I think they're 145%.
Yeah.
And I think they're at a 4.5 stress rate.
Yeah, because most banks, when I've done it, they look at 5.5. Mm-hmm. So look at a 5.5 rate and then a minimum of 100. I mean, again, it's bank dependent, but then we'll look at 145. So they'll look at 5.5. So it is, it's definitely, much more stringent now, especially on single lets, to make it work. So if you're looking at a 2-bed in Hawley, what's the average room property rental roughly?
This depends quite a lot actually on the area of Hawley. So I think should be looking at anything from 1,000 up to maybe 1,200 at the absolute top. But I think most of them, so sort of an average, is probably going to be 1,050 or 1,100.
Okay, so 12,000 per annum.
Your mental arithmetic's far better than mine. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, well, we just put 1 times 12. I can do that. Yeah. So then, it's too much for my mind to work out either as well. But,
the purchase prices that seem to be on the market. Well, I don't know about purchase prices. The asking prices that seem to be on the market range from 280 at the cheaper end up to 350 would be sort of a very expensive 2-bed. So there's a reasonable range, and I would need to be looking for something slightly below the bottom of that as an actual purchase price.
So if you bought something at 300 and you got a 75% loan to value, that would take you...
Are you going to try and make me do more mental maths?
No, I'm going to do it for you. So you'd have a 225 grand mortgage.
If you say so.
And then...
This is why I write software to do this for me. I can't do it in my head.
And then, so your rate on that, let's just say 5% for the sake of maths. That is 22, so that's 11,000. It's going to be close.
What's close? Sorry, I haven't done mental arithmetic.
So I was just thinking of the interest rate. It depends what I always think of interest only.
You're thinking about the stress rate.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of your mortgage versus rental.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, indeed, the calculations are tight as well on that, on the new purchase as well. So it would only just fit.
But that's how we do it, isn't it? We work it out and we make it happen.
No point leaving spare money hanging around.
No, well, I mean, that's
as hard as you can.
It's the interesting thing for me because you say, and again, it's just depending which side of the fence you look at. When you say, well, the further borrowing percentage is high, well, yeah, it is compared to your existing borrowing. But if you went out if you walk down the high street and say, hello, Mr. Bank Manager, can I borrow 45 grand? They say, yeah, that's fine. I'll give you 15%, or if you 10% if you're lucky. So then again, 3.74. I'm thinking, that's not bad.
That's a good point. Yeah. So, what sort of interest rates are your mortgages currently on? Just to give
this will make you feel good
because your HMO mortgages, so they're typically higher.
Yeah. So they range from.
Well, and your limited company, most of yours as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because I'm looking all personal names.
Yeah.
So another push upwards.
yeah, that's too much for my brain to cope with today. But so typically, Sir Kent Reliance were around 5.29, but again, they're 85% loan to value. They were. Now they're around 4.59. Well, they are, depending on whether you go 2-year fixed, 2-year variable. They'll either be 4.59 or 4.79. So most of mine are either 4.59 or 4.79 now. So
have you been recently remortgaging to those newer rates?
I always remortgage. But I usually do it at the front end. I'm not smart like you. I don't wait until I've got a lot of value in it. I do it at the front end to take all my money out and move on. But that has cost me. So I am in the throes of doing one right now. I hate talking about it, but we are close to offer. And that was on my 7-bed HMO, which I bought. It's a topic for another day, but I bought that as a keys undertaking. So I took control of the property before I bought it.
Okay.
And I bought that for $260. And I've just had that revalued by the bank. So it's always a low valuation because I put in 330, they valued it at 310. So, and they'll be loaning 80% against that. So,
is that valued as an HMO business, or is that valued as a residential property?
See, that's a really good point on this one, because I'm not sure, because some banks sell in somewhere in between the two. I think I'm not sure if they're taking it all on the rental revenues. I think it's somewhere between the two. So it's more bricks and mortar than it is commercial loan, I think.
Okay.
To be honest, but usually when you're talking 6-7 beds plus, then you are looking more commercial.
Yeah.
I haven't really looked into these guys actually to work out what they've done, because it's one of these properties that just sort of sits somewhere in the middle. Ideally, I'd want it to go commercial in the end.
Yeah.
But right now, it's fine for what it is. Yeah, so that's that one. But they've now just sent a letter with like 10 requests of, this is the thing. Getting further borrowing always sounds really easy, but they now need a revised business plan. They need 2 years worth of accounts, company accounts, personal accounts.
Yeah.
And so on and so on. So, that landed in my inbox today, actually. So,
yeah, so now you've got to jump through all the hoops they need.
Yeah. Yeah, so that'll probably take a few weeks to get that out. But
sorry, go on.
No, but I was going to say, but it's something I need to do for the business because, as you know, I have investors, so a lot of the capital that I pull out will be returned to investors. Yeah.
So are you, I assume you're taking fixed rate mortgages and you taking mortgage at the moment?
Yeah, I usually only do 2 years though.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. What was your current preference on period of fix or length of fix?
Yeah, for me, 2 or 3 years, because I have done I'm sure I've done a 5-year previously, and I've just found that we can't predict what's going to happen. And you can argue both sides, so I understand people that fix it for 5 years, because at least you know where you're at. I think for my business, I'd rather do the 2 years, because the other thing for me are the dreaded ERCs, early repayment charges, and that's something which has held me back from doing things I wanted to do. So most mortgages you take will have early redemption charges for whichever period you've got, and they will phase them down. It's not the right word I'm looking for, but they will just taper them down. So, for example, if I took a 3-year mortgage out today, or I have recently, if I change mortgages, so I find a better product and I want to switch that mortgage, the ERC is 3%. of the mortgage amount. So if my mortgage is 500,000, it's 15 grand. Mm-hmm. So that stops me making any decisions. Next year it'll be 2%, so that's 10,000, and then obviously 5 years. So these things I sort of weigh up, and that's the reason. And that's just explaining my rationale. So when I do 2 years, I'm not thinking necessarily about always just the rates. It's okay if something changes, and because even if I sell that property, if I redeem the mortgage, I still have an early redemption charge to pay. Right. So that's why I look at 2 years, because
increased flexibility.
Increased flexibility, as we know, property is pretty illiquid, and then if I have to get capital out and then have to give the banks even more money, that causes me even bigger problems. So that's just thought I'd explain that.
No, that's very sensible. So yeah, I'm choosing to fix for longer for mine, because mine are very definitely and deliberately long-term investments that I'm intending to let sit there, and I want to try and ride out the current issues. So we shall see.
Yeah, and I think that's the contrast of our portfolios, and I think that's why it's quite interesting, because absolutely, in your situation, when I have one studio flat which we rent out, which always rents out, and actually sometimes I'd like not to think about it. So then a 5-year fixed, or if a 10-year fixed was a really good, if it was a superb rate and for 10 years, I'd say, why not? And then I just don't have to think about it. It's a very different dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. Right, I think we're going to end it there for today. So if you'd like to get more details on Stuart or myself, along with notes on other things we've mentioned today, you can find that at thebusinessofproperty.com.